Ahsoka is a brand new Star Wars spin-off series set after The Mandalorian and a few other live-action shows, and stars Rosario Dawson as the title character Ahsoka Tano, who has been featured in other projects such as the Clone Wars TV series, Star Wars Rebels, and brief appearances in Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, and a few others. Episode 1 opens up on a ship going through its normal route into space when it receives a brand new visitor, a small little spaceship that supposedly has Jedi on board based on some old Jedi codes that are being transmitted to the bigger ship, and they're lit on board with, a little caution from the captain, and the captain goes to the entryway to greet the supposed Jedi visitors. The guests end up being two soul people, one being a young woman played by Ivana Sukno, and the other being a older man played by the late Ray Stevenson. They both wear dark cloaks and appear to have lightsabers on their belts, but this still doesn't really fool the captain, and after a bit, the two supposed Jedi just, get rid of the charade and start attacking the crew and the captain with their lightsabers, which are, of course, kind of reddish blades, as you'd expect from, not Jedi. As the two make their way for the ship, they reach their destination, a small room carrying their main prisoner, Morgan Elsbeth, played by Diana Lee Inosanto, who they're, of course, there to rescue the whole time. And Elsbeth reveals to them that Ahsoka Tano had captured her and given her to the New Republic in the first place. We cut to Ahsoka Tano on a kind of sandy planet full of ancient ruins, where she is very much looking for something that she's been tipped off by Morgan Elsbeth before, and she seems to find it in a specific spot where there's some pretty dark sand compared to the rest of the sand, and she uses her lightsabers to cut a very nice, hole into the ground, where she enters a small little room full of, ancient symbols. For examining the pillars and all of the symbols all around, she solves the brief puzzle to unlock a little sort of sand cylinder that breaks away, and inside it is a sort of metal sphere that supposedly holds the information that she's looking for, and the bad guys of the series are also looking for. When Ahsoka emerges from the room, she's met with a few droids that are looking for the orb and attempt to kill her to get it, but they're no match for her, as she is a former Jedi with, lightsabers, and those usually better than spears and blasters. At least that's my opinion. However, all the droids have self-destruct sequences, so she immediately starts running away from them and, has her ship, come by to pick her up and get away from the explosion, which ends up being surprisingly massive for a few droids. Inside the ship, Ahsoka meets up with her fellow pilot and helping droid, Hu Yang, voiced by David Tennant, where she reveals that she has the little sort of orb, and they take off into space and meet up with the leading ship for a whole New Republic fleet. And inside, Ahsoka meets up with an old friend, Hera Syndulla, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and talk about the attack on the prison ship and the escape of Morgan as Elsbeth. They look over hologram footage of the attack and try to figure out who the two attackers are, with not too much luck from Ahsoka, who can't recognize them. But Hu Yin suggests that he'll run some analysis on their lightsabers, which of course they can see from the footage, and possibly sort of look at almost, records to see who they are for that. While weighing their options on that case, Ahsoka brings up the orb to Hera and mentions the possibility of finding the location of their old friend Ezra Bridger, who was lost not too long ago alongside the Empire's very own Grand Admiral Thrawn during the events of Star Wars Rebels. Hera recommends that there's really only one other person who can probably help crack the code of the orb and find whatever secrets are held inside it, and the only person they can think of is an old friend and an old apprentice of Ahsoka's, Sabine Wren. Meanwhile, on the planet Lothal, we see a big celebration going on, which turns out to be a celebration of the Empire's fall and also the courageous acts of Ezra and taking down Grand Admiral Thrawn. And the speaker of this, big event, who is supposed to be some sort of governor played by Clancy Brown, announces that, they've got one of the big people who helped make all of that happen, Sabine, to come on and speak at the event, but she isn't there at all. So he gets his, top people looking for her. We cut to a sort of highway where Sabine, who is played by Natasha Liu Bordizzo, is riding on a speeder bike, listening to some sort of rock music almost, like speeding straight ahead to a sort of communications tower, being slowed down by some X-Wings, of course sent over to kind of stop her and escort her back to the celebration, but she speeds past them and is able to eventually get back on her path to the sort of radio tower. She makes it all the way up to the top of the tower and enters the sort of maintenance room inside, which has all kinds of extra stuff in there because this used to be Ezra's old sort of home back when things were more simple. She starts looking through Ezra's old stuff and also meeting a little almost alien cat who's inside, who's almost like a mix between a cat and a lemur, I guess, and ends up finding an old little holographic message from Ezra, clearly before everything kind of went wrong, at least for Ezra and for those who really cared about him. When she exits the room, she sees a number of X-Wings going towards the main city, as well as Ahsoka's ship. And she, of course, guesses that, something might be kind of up. At the Senate building, Sabine walks up, finding Ahsoka standing by the governor, and also with Huyang. And, of course, things are a little kind of silent and awkward before the governor kind of walks off, telling her that, what Ahsoka has to say is important, and that, before that she, kind of missed the celebration, which, also kind of important. Inside the ship, Ahsoka shows Sabine the orb and mentions the idea of a map being hidden inside it and the possibility of bringing back Ezra. And Sabine starts examining it, guessing that there is some sort of code to sort of crack. And Ahsoka helps out by setting up a kind of scan of the ruins on the planet that she visited to get the orb. From dialogue, we can guess that their relationship is a little strained after everything that had transpired before, and also that Sabine's Jedi training kind of just stopped after Ezra disappeared, and after Ahsoka just felt that she was a little bit impossible to deal with. Huyang cuts in by mentioning that he has something kind of important to bring up, and while Ahsoka wants him to kind of leave it for later, Sabine wants her to just go deal with it, and she just decides to do that. Huyang then brings up that he made a full scan of the lightsabers from the security footage and completed the full scans with some sort of database pieces from the old Jedi archives. He says that he doesn't recognize one of the lightsabers, but recognizes the other, having belonged to a old youngling at the Jedi Temple, his name being Baylan Skoll. When Ahsoka comes back into the room, she finds that Sabine is gone with the orb, and is obviously not too pleased with that. Back at the old tower, Sabine starts looking at the orb, bringing in some papers and data pads, as well as a scanning of the ancient ruins and trying to decipher whatever sort of code is inside the orb. And at first it seems like there's pretty much no luck until she looks over the scanning one more time, noticing kind of a pattern of free statues nearby the free pillars, and a sort of pattern on the floor making free interlocking sort of eye-shaped ovals, and in sort of one sort of solid symbol, a symbol that ends up appearing on the orb, at least in a little small way. Sabine then notices that the parts of the orbs are able to move, and she ends up moving free sort of top pieces of it until they make the right pattern and unlocks the star map, which turns into one big hologram that sort of encases the orb and reveals not only the main galaxy that pretty much everyone in Star Wars lives in, but another galaxy across from it, sort of connected by one fin line attached to another planet. Sabine then gets out and starts kind of looking at the stars via some goggles, and clearly being hit with a lot of hope that her old friend can be kind of returned back to her and returned to everyone else. She cuddles up with the cat Fane, and at a certain point it starts hissing, alerting her to a assassin droid that is right behind her and tries to attack her. She gets a little bit of a head start against it, but it's still able to get enough of a upper hand on her, but she knocks it down, but is also faced with yet another one. And while distracted, the first droid comes into the room, takes the orb, and then destroys all of the documents that kind of helped her before, just in case, kind of a scorched earth sort of thing. The droid then moves forward while Sabine is still having to deal with the second droid, and it takes a little bit for her to get out of its grasp, using the blaster on its back to destroy its foot and then knock it down and shoot it. But as she runs after the first droid, it's too late, as it makes it to the elevator and goes down. She runs into the room again and looks through a box of Ezra's old stuff and picks up his old lightsaber, and eventually goes downstairs via the elevator after it's finished being used, and is met with the droid and also the Dark Jedi apprentice from before. The two of them ignite their lightsabers and begin fighting. It's kind of a even fight at first, until the apprentice is able to kind of get an upper hand on Sabine and flip her around. And then there's a brief moment where Sabine kind of almost gets her, but it ends up just not going well for her, as just as Ahsoka and Huane show up to help after she called for help, the apprentice stabs Sabine in the side with her lightsaber, to which she falls on the ground, and the apprentice runs away with the droid, now having the map. In episode 2, Sabine wakes up in the local hospital and recounts everything that had happened last night to Ahsoka. Despite begging to, Ahsoka decides not to take Sabine with her to investigate, saying that she has done enough, though the way she says it might not, put Sabine at much ease, or make her not think it's her fault. Back at the communications tower, Ahsoka investigates the area, trying to piece together what clues might have been left behind by the attackers to possibly find them at some point. Thankfully, one of the assassin droids stuck around inside the main room to try to attack any people who were snooping around for any extra clues. Ahsoka is able to easily cut off its head and brings the body back to Sabine and Huane. Thankfully, the way Ahsoka cut off the head means that they were able to get everything intact enough to actually investigate the main memory board and every important little piece of tech inside the droid to find its last known whereabouts before coming to Lothal. Eventually they're able to find out about the droid's last known whereabouts, which was a shipyard in Corellia, which Ahsoka mentions Morgan Elsbeth used to have a shipyard for the Empire back in the day on Corellia. So they of course decide to investigate that place, see if any Imperial activity is still possibly going on under the New Republic's nose. Meanwhile, on an island type of planet, Baylan and his apprentice Shin are waiting on some sort of ancient stone ceremony type of area where Morgan later meets them via her own ship, and they have the orb on a sort of little pedestal in the middle of the ceremony type of area, waiting for her assistance. Soon she uses her powers, which turn out to be magic sort of powers from the Night Sisters of Dathomir, which is different from the Force, but still pretty powerful, and is able to unlock the map with the sort of ritual type of area being fit for highlighting parts of the map, which are now made larger and, more clear to see. Like when Sabine opened the map, a point is highlighted between a specific area and their galaxy and an entirely different galaxy where Admiral Thrawn is supposedly sort of hidden almost and can't really get out on his own. Morgan then briefly mentions that she can hear whispers from Thrawn calling to her, to which Baylan kind of passes it off as nothing more than basic visions and, just stuff you almost want to hear, nothing more than that. But she of course sees this as, truth, and knows that they're close to their goal of freeing Admiral Thrawn. While Morgan leaves, Shin kind of asks Baylan what exactly will happen once they free Thrawn and kind of just complete their goals. And Baylan mentions that for some people it'll be war, for others it'll be, a sort of great new era, and for the two of them it'll be power that they couldn't even initially imagine. On Corellia, Ahsoka and Hera land in the shipyard and meet up with the sort of supervisor who's just kind of watching over everything, just making sure the job is done and all that. Back at the hospital, Sabine's bandages are removed and she's able to get up from her bed and walk around, ending up talking to Huyang about everything that's happened so far and some of her frustrations at Ahsoka. He tries to kind of explain a lot of those things as irrelevant and just simply in the past, and the fact that things are just the way they are now, like Ahsoka having come to Sabine for help, regardless of how useful she seemed or not. On top of that, he tries to quell her insecurities about her Jedi abilities and how her training did not really go too well, regardless of whether it's Ahsoka's fault or not, or even her own. She's still not entirely getting it, and instead says that she just won't waste any more of Ahsoka's time, but Huyang sort of tries to hand her Ezra's lightsaber and tells her that the only time she is wasting is her own. And she picks up the lightsaber and silently contemplates many of those things and walks off. Back at the shipyard, the supervisor is taking Ahsoka and Hera to the sort of control center looking over the shipyard, where he is asked more questions specifically about the types of Imperial ship tech that they're repurposing for the New Republic. Some of it seeming a little weird and seeming a little not too useful for what the New Republic is really doing. And on top of that, Ahsoka asks if they're using any assassin droids in the shipyard, at least for a repurpose. But the supervisor denies this. But one of the sort of protocol droids nearby mentions that there was a droid of that type that stopped them from completing a task, and supposedly is still on the shipyard, leaving on a departing vessel right at that moment. During this, one of the human employees nearby turns out to be a Imperial loyalist and attempts to take out Ahsoka and Hera, but is stopped by Ahsoka's blades. And immediately she cuts through the window and jumps out to try and stop the ship from taking off and to stop the droid from escaping. During this, Hera gets onto her ship, the Phantom, to try and intercept the ship while Ahsoka is on her way there. Unfortunately, Ahsoka is slowed down by someone who seems to be working for Morgan, a Inquisitor-looking person with a double-bladed lightsaber and a mask to cover their face. Hera begins getting closer to the ship and trying to contact whoever's piloting it through communications, demanding that they land immediately, but the guns on the back of the ship start firing at her, and it's pretty clear that they are not going to stand down, and this is going to get a little rough. While maneuvering around these shots, Hera gets her R-unit droid chopper to look for a tracking device to toss onto the ship so they can at least track it while minimizing any sort of damage from trying to attack it head on, while also making sure it doesn't land into the city if it was shot down at any point. Ahsoka has a decent try with the Inquisitor while also taking down the droid assisting him and getting some good strikes off, not too much damage to either of them. Eventually the Inquisitor decides to break from the fight and simply throws his spinning double-bladed lightsaber at Ahsoka, but she dodges it and he starts running away towards the ship, which is piloted by the Dark Jedi, and is able to eventually escape, and his lightsaber kind of boomerangs back to him, so he's got his property back at least. That's nice. While Ahsoka is standing around not feeling too great about the less than stellar victory, Hera contacts her saying that she was able to get the tracking device onto the ship and they'll soon have a signal to track. Back at the old communication tower, Sabine goes back to the room to find her old Mandalorian gear, which she left under a desk alongside other sort of old things left behind. She puts all of the pieces together alongside her main helmet and then sort of puts it all on and proceeds to cut her hair, both because it's, her original haircut and because, it is a little practical. I mean, not all that hair is going to fit in that helmet. Back at Ahsoka's ship, we see her kind of walking around preparing to leave when she gets a hologram transmission sort of request that's like kind of blinking a little bit. She receives the call and sees a hologram of Sabine in her armor, to which she says that she is ready for her training, finally. And later the two of them meet back on Lothal in front of the old mural that was made of the whole crew. Huyang then comes to them mentioning that Hera finally got a solid signal on the tracker, revealing that the transporting ship is hovering over the planet of Cetos and hasn't really done much since then. So, of course, Ahsoka and Sabine get on the ship and prepare to head in that direction, with Ahsoka telling Sabine to make the little final jump to hyperspace, calling her a Padawan. In space above Cetos, we see the transport ship bringing over what cargo was attached to it, a hyperdrive, over to a giant sort of ring that seems to have other hyperdrives attached to it, connected to Morgan's ship, the Eye of Sion. Turns out that Morgan is getting all these hyperdrives together and this giant ring to transport them all the way to wherever Admiral Thrawn is hidden. And that was the double episode premiere of Ahsoka. I thought it was a decent couple of episodes so far. In terms of a first impression, especially if you're a first-time Star Wars watcher, not really me, but I sometimes imagine what some people would think watching something like this without context of Rebels and all that. And it's not entirely a great first impression. I kind of wish they would have done what the Obi-Wan series did and had like a whole sort of context montage intro at the beginning, except probably much longer, seeing how you'd have to have a montage for a lot of Ahsoka's life during the Clone Wars, and then what she was doing a little bit during Rebels, and then of course also the events of Rebels and Ezra's story, Sabine's story, and Hera's story, all of that. And they didn't really do that too much, so they are definitely expecting you to have watched Rebels. And it is a Disney Plus exclusive series, so you do have access to Rebels if you have Disney Plus, but still a weird idea to just kind of leave some viewers blind. In terms of the portrayals of the animated Rebels characters and finally brought to live action, they're pretty decent. I don't know if they would be my first choices, though I'm not a casting director and I'm not, knowledgeable of a lot of actors to know who could be better. But, Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Natasha Liu Bardizzo. But it's fine. Rosario Dawson is still decent as Ahsoka. There's, of course, more of a stoic performance there compared to the bits of, Ahsoka's appearances in Rebels as a older Ahsoka, but it is fine. To a degree, you gotta be a bit more subtle when doing, a performance in a live-action project compared to animated, which in some ways I think is the disadvantage with live-action Star Wars to some degree, and why sometimes animated Star Wars like Clone Wars and Rebels does work a little better in some places. And there's also more freedom with the characters and with all of these different things you can do and all of these just creative things people have in mind and can't always accomplish in live action with the budget that you usually have. From these couple of episodes, the story seems decent enough. Most of the characters as characters are fine. There's nothing too unbelievable or silly, and it is cool to see all the Rebels stuff come to live action and also be continued. And I'm interested in seeing where it all goes from there. Like, it'll be interesting getting to see Ezra and Thrawn in live action, but also just come back from where they were before. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Other than that, like, the soundtrack's a little forgettable so far, outside of the extended version of the main theme in the end credits, because I don't think they always give it enough time to shine when it shows up at first, though it still doesn't have as much punch as the Mandalorian and Boba Fett themes from their shows. I'm gonna give episode 1 of Ahsoka a 7 out of 10, and then I'm going to give episode 2 a 7 out of 10 as well. A decent enough start. I hope you enjoyed this review for the dual premiere of Ahsoka, and I hope you stay tuned for more. I'm interested in seeing where it all goes from here. Maybe check out some of my other videos and possibly like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys next time. Take care.